When most people imagine the American frontier, love is rarely part of the picture. The mind drifts instead to dust-choked trails, gunfire echoing through empty streets, and solitary figures pressing forward against impossible odds. Survival dominates the narrative. Hardship defines the legend. Yet beneath this hardened exterior, hidden behind the myths of rugged individualism, existed a quieter truth, one rarely told, often forgotten, and profoundly human. What kind of love could survive in a place where tomorrow was never guaranteed? This question sits at the heart of frontier history, waiting patiently for us to ask it. Because while history books often chronicle expansion through battles, treaties, and railroads, they rarely pause to examine the emotional lives of those who lived it day by day. And yet, in private letters, weathered diaries, and fading courthouse records, another story emerges, one of tenderness, born under pressure, of affection sharpened by adversity, and of devotion forged where comfort was scarce and loss was common. To understand frontier love, we must first understand its environment. Life in the West was not merely difficult, it was consuming. Long distances separated families. Communication could take months. Illness, accidents, and violence were constant companions. There were no guarantees, no safety nets, and no assurances that effort would be rewarded. In such a world, emotional bonds were not luxuries, they were lifelines, and that is precisely what makes these love stories so remarkable. Unlike modern romance, frontier love was rarely built on convenience. Courtship unfolded slowly, often in silence, sometimes through nothing more than shared labor or exchanged glances across a communal meal. In places where entertainment was scarce and privacy rarer still, affection revealed itself through action rather than words. A repaired fence, a shared harvest, a journey made dangerous simply to deliver a letter. What does love look like when it must justify its existence every single day? For many on the frontier, love was not something discovered, it was something chosen. Chosen repeatedly, despite hunger, fear, and uncertainty. Chosen not because it was easy, but because it made survival meaningful. These relationships did not flourish in spite of hardship. They were shaped by it. The stories we are about to uncover are not legends polished by nostalgia. They are drawn from documented accounts, letters preserved by descendants, journals archived in local museums, testimonies recorded long after the dust had settled. They reveal couples who laughed in the face of scarcity, who grieved together under open skies, and who found emotional refuge in one another when the world offered none. But why have these stories remained hidden? Part of the answer lies in the way we remember history. The frontier has long been framed as a masculine conquest, defined by domination over land rather than connection between people. Emotional vulnerability does not fit neatly into that image. Love, especially tender love, complicates the myth, and so it was often omitted. Yet without these stories, our understanding of the frontier remains incomplete. Consider the isolation alone. Many settlers lived days, sometimes weeks from their nearest neighbor. In such conditions, companionship took on a depth rarely required today. A partner was not just a romantic interest, but a collaborator, a confidant, and often the only witness to one's existence. Love became survival, and survival reinforced love. How does affection evolve when two people depend entirely on one another? In answering that question, we begin to see why frontier love was often intense, resilient, and deeply committed. There was no room for illusion. You learned who someone was quickly, how they responded to fear, to failure, to exhaustion. Romance stripped of fantasy reveals something truer, something earned. As we move deeper into these stories, we will encounter couples who met by chance on wagon trails, whose relationships grew from shared danger rather than shared leisure. We will read of handwritten letters carried across hundreds of miles, of marriages formed not from desperation but from deliberate hope. And we will confront the reality that love, when tested by extreme conditions, does not weaken, it clarifies. These are not stories of perfection. They include conflict, loss, and grief. But within those trials lies their power, because love on the frontier was never guaranteed, never assumed, and never taken lightly. And perhaps that is why it endured. As we continue, ask yourself this: if love could survive there amid isolation, danger, and relentless uncertainty, what does that say about its power? And what might we rediscover about connection, commitment, and devotion by listening to these forgotten voices? In the silence of the past, they are still speaking, and we are just beginning to hear them. Love on the frontier rarely began with certainty. It did not arrive wrapped in promises or protected by stability. Instead, it surfaced quietly, often unnoticed, at first born out of shared endurance rather than romantic expectation. In a land where survival demanded constant vigilance, affection had to earn its place, and yet, despite the odds, it did. Early accounts of frontier romance reveal stories that feel almost foreign to modern sensibilities. Courtship unfolded not through leisure, but through necessity. Two people might meet while repairing a broken wagon, sharing a scarce meal, or enduring a violent storm together. Attraction was not based on charm alone, but on character revealed under pressure. On the frontier, these answers mattered more than words. What does love become when it grows in the shadow of danger? For many couples, affection developed slowly, cautiously, shaped by an awareness that emotional investment carried real risk. Illness, accidents, and violence could end a life without warning. To love deeply was to accept the possibility of profound loss. And yet, that risk did not deter connection, it intensified it. Love was not careless, it was deliberate. Documented letters from frontier settlers reveal this truth with striking clarity. Men and women wrote not of grand romantic fantasies, but of mutual reliance, shared hope, and quiet devotion. A simple sentence, "Your presence steadies me," carried more weight than poetic declarations ever could. In an environment where the future was uncertain, honesty became the highest form of intimacy. Distance, too, shaped frontier love in unique ways. Many relationships were sustained across vast stretches of land, with months passing between letters. Each message carried not only affection, but reassurance of survival. The arrival of a letter was an event, often read and reread until the paper itself wore thin. Love endured not through constant contact, but through trust built over time and silence. How strong must a bond be to survive separation without certainty of reunion? Marriage on the frontier reflected this same practicality, intertwined with genuine affection. Weddings were often simple, sometimes improvised, yet deeply meaningful. There were no lavish ceremonies, only witnesses, vows, and a shared understanding of what lay ahead. These unions were not entered lightly. To marry was to form a partnership against hardship, to share responsibility as much as emotion. Yet it would be a mistake to assume these marriages were purely transactional. Diaries and family records tell a different story, one of tenderness expressed through action. A spouse rising early to ease the other's burden. A shared moment of laughter after a long day's labor. As families formed, love expanded beyond the couple. Children were raised in environments defined by uncertainty, yet grounded in deep parental devotion. Parents taught resilience not through words, but through example. Love became a stabilizing force, offering children a sense of belonging even when the world outside their door was unpredictable. But frontier love was not untouched by tragedy. Illness swept through settlements without warning. Accidents claimed lives abruptly. Violence was an ever-present threat. Many couples faced loss that would have shattered less resilient bonds. And yet, again and again, historical records showed devotion persisting beyond grief. Widows and widowers often spoke of love not as something that ended with death, but as something that shaped every decision afterward. Some never remarried, choosing instead to honor the bond they had lost. Others found new love, carrying forward the lessons of resilience and compassion learned through hardship. In both cases, love left a permanent imprint. Why did these bonds endure when so much else failed? Perhaps because frontier love was built on reality rather than illusion. It acknowledged fear without being defined by it. It embraced vulnerability not as weakness, but as necessity. In a world stripped of comfort, emotional connection became one of the few sources of meaning. As we move closer to the end of these stories, a larger truth begins to emerge. These relationships were not exceptions to frontier life, they were essential to it. Love did not distract from survival. It made survival worthwhile. It transformed barren land into home, isolation into partnership, and uncertainty into shared purpose. And still, these stories remain largely untold. As we prepare to explore why they matter today, one question lingers. If love could endure under such relentless pressure, what might we learn from it in a world that often takes connection for granted? The echoes of devotion remain, waiting to be heard. When the dust of the frontier finally settled and the era faded into history, what remained was not only land shaped by hardship, but lives shaped by devotion. The love stories of the American frontier did not disappear, they were simply absorbed into family lines, quiet memories, and forgotten documents. Yet their echoes still reach us, carrying lessons that feel unexpectedly relevant in a modern world, filled with convenience, speed, and emotional distance. What do these stories offer us today, beyond nostalgia? At their core, frontier love stories challenge our assumptions about connection. In fact, it often flourishes in their absence. These couples built relationships without instant communication, without guarantees, and without the illusion of endless options. Love was not a fleeting emotion, it was a daily decision, reinforced by action rather than affirmation. In reading old letters and journals, one theme emerges with striking clarity. Presence mattered more than perfection. Couples wrote about exhaustion, frustration, and fear, but also about perseverance. They did not expect love to shield them from hardship. They expected it to help them endure it. This perspective stands in sharp contrast to modern ideals that often equate love with ease. What if love is not meant to make life easier, but more meaningful? Frontier couples understood this intuitively. Their devotion was grounded in shared responsibility and mutual respect. Each partner's survival depended on the other's reliability. Trust was not optional, it was essential. This necessity forged bonds that were resilient, adaptable, and deeply rooted in reality. These stories also redefine romance itself. Romance on the frontier was not measured by gestures, but by sacrifice, not by the willingness to stay when leaving would have been safer, by the choice to love despite uncertainty. In this way, frontier love strips romance of illusion and reveals its foundation, commitment. The relevance of this lesson today is impossible to ignore. In an age where connection is instant and disposable, these stories invite us to slow down and reconsider what endures. They ask us whether love built on convenience can rival love built on necessity, whether abundance strengthens connection or dilutes it. Another powerful insight emerges when we examine how these relationships shaped communities. Frontier love was not private, it was communal. Strong partnerships stabilized settlements, raised resilient children, and fostered cooperation. Love was not merely personal fulfillment, it was social infrastructure. Entire communities depended on the strength of these bonds. What happens to a society when commitment weakens? The frontier offers a compelling answer. Where devotion was strong, communities endured. Where trust fractured, survival became fragile. These stories remind us that love, when practiced with intention, extends beyond to individuals. It creates continuity. It builds legacy. Perhaps most importantly, these stories honor emotional courage. Loving on the frontier required bravery equal to physical endurance. To care deeply was to expose oneself to loss in a world where loss was common. Yet people loved anyway. They wrote letters, knowing they might never be answered. They built families knowing tomorrow was uncertain. They hoped not because it was safe, but because it was necessary. That courage deserves remembrance. As we uncover these forgotten love stories, we do more than correct the historical record. We reclaim a fuller understanding of the human experience. The frontier was not only a place of conquest and conflict, it was a place of connection, devotion, and quiet resilience. And perhaps that is why these stories still resonate, because beneath the distance of time, the questions remain the same. What does it mean to commit? What makes love endure? And how do we choose one another when the future offers no guarantees? The answers lie not in myth, but in memory, in the whispers of those who loved deeply, lived honestly, and left behind more than survival, they left legacy. Their stories remind us that love has always been humanity's most enduring frontier.